Do you find threading your needle easy, or do you find it hard? There are a number of ways which you can actually thread a needle, and today I'm going to be showing you each of those methods, and you can find the easiest way that you find, and I think by the end of it you'll have it nailed, or is that needled? Okay, so how do you thread a needle? This is a reasonable sized eye, okay, and I tend to use the embroidery needles that have this long eye. I always find those easier to use and easier to thread up. And you tend to use either a strand of stranded cotton, or you might use a machine sewing cotton. But either way, what tends to happen is they tend to get a little bit fuzzy at the end, and then when you're trying to thread your needle, it's really quite difficult to get that in unless you wiggle it about, and even then, as you can see, it's quite a struggle, and the more you do it, the more the end tends to fray and the harder it gets to thread your needle. Okay, so the best ways of threading those needles are to change the end. So obviously if it's shredded like that and it's very, very frayed, then it's going to be harder to thread. So there's different ways that you can actually improve the end to thread your needle much more easily. So I'm going to show you some examples of ends of thread and what I've actually done to those ends. Okay, so here's a sample of different threads. So this is a thread that would have just come off your reel, or it's just been in amongst all the rest of your stranded cottons and then taken out. And you can see that it's quite shredded at the end, it's quite frayed, and this would be quite hard to thread through your needle. Now what you can do is you can trim that thread, and this one has just been trimmed, so probably about here on this thread, just to make that end a lot neater, and you can see it straight away that it is much neater. Now this one here has been dampened or licked. Now traditionally you wouldn't tend to lick your thread because say you've had a chocolate biscuit or a cup of tea, you could dirty your thread. You know, it's a bit gross to be licking your thread, but you know, it does have the desired effect of making that thread nice and tight together. But a better way of doing it is to actually use wax, and you can see really well that this one is much straighter and much finer straight away just using a piece of wax. This is a well-used piece of wax here. So wax is the best way to get your end really nice and flat and tight. Okay, so here we have some thread, and I'm just going to trim that end off like that, and then we should be able to much easier thread that thread. Now if you're using your thread and you've got it here, then clearly it's going to bend. You're not going to be able to focus on that eye as well. But if you take your thread and you've got just the end, then you should be much easier to thread that needle. However, you can see straight away it is starting to fray again, and it has frayed quite a bit just while I've been poking that through because I haven't done anything but actually cut the end. Now what I do find is if you actually cut the end there like that, let's just blow those away, and you pull that really close to your nail, then it lies really flat against your nail, and you should just be able to then push it into the needle, and that makes it much easier. If you haven't got any wax or anything like that, even without dampening the thread, you could see how easy that was to thread. So let me show you that again. Okay, I'm just going to trim that end off because every time you've used a thread it does go a little bit frayy. So I'm just going to pull that back, okay, and I'm just going to take the needle and make sure that your needle, you know, it's facing upwards now. You need to make sure that you turn it so it's at a right angle, and you're just pushing that along your finger like that, and then you can just pull that out and it's through the needle eye really easily. Okay, but obviously now that end is shredded. It's not going to go through that very easily again. if you just take your wax and just wax the end of that thread, well, do it about 3, maybe 4 times, and then it'll be nice and flat, and even without putting it right against your nail there, you should just be able to pull that through really easily. And you can see it hasn't shredded either this time. Okay, and you could just take, you know, if your needle fell off again, you could just thread that up really, really quickly and easily. So that's the traditional method of threading your needle. Now, there's some more unusual methods of threading your needle, and they're quite interesting to watch. So I'm going to show those to you. So one of the funniest ways of threading your needle is to actually use a toothbrush. Okay, so you do need to make sure that you hold the toothbrush down in place and you put the thread over, and the thread is actually on the brushes. Okay, now make sure that your needle the eye is upright, and place that on, and you will see that that thread is going through the eye of the needle like that, and then you should just be able to pull it through like that. And it's really, really simple and easy to do. Make sure you use a clean toothbrush and not a dirty one that you've been cleaning things with. So one of the other ways is, because your thread is shredded like this, what you can do is you can take the thread in a loop like this and pull it nice and tightly and pull it off the end of your needle, and it forms a nice little loop that you can then poke through the eye of the needle like that. So let me show you that one again. So we just take a loop, okay, and we pull that off the end of the needle like that, and you have your little loop there like that, and you can just poke that through the end of the needle like that, and that makes for an easy threaded needle. So another method is a bit of a strange one, is to actually rub it. So I'm going to show you with a big needle first. This is an unusual one. So this is a really nice size needle and obviously a finer thread. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to rub that on my hand like that. And you can see that the thread just comes through. It's really, really funny. It's a little bit crazy, but it works. So we're going to do that on the smaller needle, okay? So we're just going to take a smaller needle and we'll put the thread over our hand. Make sure that you're doing it on a fleshy part of your hand, okay? And take the needle very tightly and just rub it against your hand like that. And you can see the thread is just coming straight up through the needle, and you can just take that thread and pull it through. And there we go. So that's how to thread a needle. Now this is a really fibrous type of thread, and this is the most common type of thread that you use. I tend to use a thread called translucent, and that's much, much finer. So I'm just going to show you that thread. So this is the thread that I tend to use like that. And even at this distance, you can see that it's quite fine. And even from a distance, it just pokes straight through the needle eye. And that's without having cut it. It's just really, really fine. It's really easy to thread through your needle. So it does depend on the thread you're using as well. Some threads are thicker and more fibrous, and some are much, much easier to thread. Did you find those easy? Or did you find them a little bit on the trickier side? Some of them are very easy to do, and some of them are a little bit trickier, but it requires practice like everything else. And don't forget to like and subscribe. If you've got any comments that you want to make, please feel free to do so below.